Hello, Bible lovers. With the horrible headlines with the child molesting priests and the bishops that cover up for the child molesting priests, I thought I would have a go at explaining why this happens all over the Catholic Church, all over the world, why it's been happening for a long time, and why it happens in other churches and other Christian denominations, not just the Catholic. So the same is true for the Protestants and the Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses. They all have this problem of not only pedophilia, but covering it up. And so what do they all have in common? Of course, they're all people of the Bible. So I'm going to show you how the Bible dug all these people into a hole. To begin with, Jesus taught, "Do not judge and you will not be judged." And he stuck by his guns. In John 8, 1 through 11, that's where they bring the adulteress to Jesus and they want him to judge her. He refuses to judge her twice. He turns his back on them, refuses to judge. And then he finally says, "Let the one without sin cast the first stone," and the crowd disperses. And he says, "I do not condemn you." He doesn't say, "I forgive you," because he's never judged her. "I do not condemn you, go and sin no more." So if Jesus said not to judge, what is the bishop doing judging the priests in the first place? Well, what the bishops are doing are following the advice of Paul. For instance, in 1 Corinthians, the 6th chapter, he says, "Any one of you having a matter against the other, dare he go to the law before the unrighteous," meaning go to a normal court, "and not before the saints," people like the bishop, people who have been appointed. "Or do you not know that the saints," people like the bishop, "will judge the world? And if the world is to be judged by you, are you unworthy of the smallest cases?" So anything smaller than the world is small, and they should be able to judge it. "Do you not know that we will judge angels?" And so he extends it even more. "How much more the things in this life?" So it's Paul that's encouraging all the judging, not Jesus. This is just another bit of evidence that Paul never heard of Jesus. So now we'll look at some more biblical advice here. Jesus says in Matthew, the 18th chapter, "If your brother sins against you, go and confront him privately. If he listens to you, you have won your brother over." So if you've got something against someone, you don't confront them in front of everyone unnecessarily. You confront them privately. Perfectly good advice. However, we get to Paul in Galatians, 6th chapter. "Do not rebuke an older man, but appeal to him as a father. Treat younger men as brothers. Do not entertain an accusation against an elder, except on the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. But those who persist in sin should be rebuked in front of everyone, so that the others will stand in fear of sin." So that sounds pretty good, except let's look at it a little closer. Do not rebuke an older man. Okay, so all of a sudden, the king of rebukes, Paul, saying, well, you know what? When it's an older man, you appeal to him as a father. You wouldn't rebuke your father. All of a sudden, it's a step down. And wouldn't you know, Paul is an older man. So again, the standard doesn't apply to everyone equally. And of course, when he says an older man, for instance, a bishop dealing with a priest would still be considered an older man. He would be an experienced one in terms of faith. And so Paul is saying, these people related to you, you have to be gentle, extra gentle with them. And it says, And don't even accuse them except on the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. That's a huge bar. So it's like, don't even pester these guys unless there's overwhelming evidence. And then it says you should rebuke them in case there's overwhelming evidence. But that isn't hard and fast. It's a should. It isn't you must. If we confess our sins, says 1 John 1:9, he is faithful and just to forgive our sins and to cleanse us of all forgiveness. And so if you're the bishop and you're hearing some priest in front of you crying his little eyes out, how he didn't know what overcame him and how terrible he feels, well, you can forgive those sins and cleanse that unrighteous just by the act of his confessing. That could be good enough for you as the spiritual confessor, especially if you're a bishop. You've got the power to forgive sins. There you go. 1 Timothy 5:19, brothers, if someone is caught in a trespass, you who are spiritual, the bishop, should restore him, not throw him out, with a spirit of, again, gentleness. But watch yourself, that you may not be tempted. So again, gentle all the way. Yet do not regard him as an enemy, but warn him as a brother. My brothers, if one of you should wander from the truth and someone should bring him back, consider this. Whoever turns a sinner from the error of his ways will save his soul from death and cover over a multitude of sins. And so, the bishop, he'd be covering over a multitude of sins. The guiltier that his spiritual brother is in front of him, why, that's trivial. Because that's his job, to cover over a multitude of sins. And why? Well, because if any of this got out, of course, we go back to the name of God would be blasphemed among the non-believers, the Gentiles. Couldn't possibly have that. That's worse than child molesting, blaspheming the name of God. And it does protect the brand. So there's been a huge pressure. It's like the Bible walks you through, if you're a bishop, the gentlest possible way to deal with the sniveling, guilty individuals in front of you. Anyway, and that's kind of the extent of the Bible's wisdom on counseling. You think of the Bible as this big book of secret wisdom from God. And it isn't. It's full of this bland, non-specific, not particularly helpful advice that's also contradicting. Jesus had not to judge at all. And Paul is Mr., like I say, judge. That's the name of his game. That's how he makes his money, is setting himself up a judge of everyone else. And that's how those bishops and those priests are making their money. And that's why they don't want to taint the brand by having any of this stuff go public. And so anyway, now that's a pretty good little Bible lesson. Thanks for watching.